Hello, NF Geeks. This is Greg Scorzo. I'm coming to you from Leicester, UK. I'm here to answer the lady survey questions because the lady survey questions at the moment are getting a lot of traction in the feminist community, and I'm a feminist. And Carol Kamos did this survey herself and answered the questions in a way which I was kind of fascinated by. And the reason I was fascinated by them is because, on the one hand, I can see in both her answers and in the questions a very good pro-feminist sentiment. I worry that in the questions and in the answers that are being given to this survey, there's a lot of implicit sexism against women, ironically. So I wanted to answer these questions in a way where maybe I can help to show an example of somebody answering the questions where those sexist elements aren't in the answers. So here goes. Question 1. Do you agree women have a harder time on the internet than men? Well, I think it's important to give a very careful, nuanced response to this question. In general, there is a gender norm that oppresses women. And that gender norm is the expectation that women are made for and primarily good at working in the domestic sphere. Insofar as they go out of that sphere to do any kind of media or any kind of writing or say anything that involves any kind of thinking that isn't related to motherhood or being pretty, the assumption is they're less good at that or less qualified or less capable than men, because it's men's job to be providers and go outside of the domestic sphere, and women's job to be pretty and raise babies. Now, in that sense, I think you can say the internet, like society as a whole, has an inherent bias that disadvantages women. But I think that's not really telling the whole story. The salient feature of women on the internet has been that women have created a space, utilizing the advantages of a very new form of media, to filter out gender norms in a way that has been unprecedented. So what I mean by that is, if you're a woman, you can go on the internet and have a relationship with media where you only can, if you want, read progressive newspapers or listen to progressive radio or talk to progressive people on forums who share your progressive views. You can, if people assault you or insult, or harass you or abuse you, record the things that they've said and send them to authorities in ways that would be much more difficult in real life if you heard harassment or abuse on the street. So I think in that context, women have actually made tremendous strides towards creating a wonderful electronic form of media in the internet, which is unprecedented in its gender equality. And I think that's a really important thing to emphasize when you answer that question, or else you belittle the achievements of women. And you fall into the trap that a lot of feminists fall into of describing women as essential victims who never actually are capable of improving the situations in which they come to be in, because their psychological fragility just can't allow them to be in any situation without being massively dominated and oppressed by whatever baddie men are in that situation. That's an interesting, but I think very reactionary way of looking at women that unfortunately a lot of feminists these days are endorsing. It sounds superficially progressive because it sounds like you're saying women are the victims of all these injustices, and we want to do whatever we can to address these justices and make sure that women don't have to suffer the way that they're currently suffering. Well, the problem for me is that narrative of women sounds suspiciously like a narrative of women that you got before feminism, in which women were described as psychologically weak and constantly being harassed by baddie men, and in order to deal with this problem, you needed strong men to come in and save the women, the good men, as it were. And I worry that when I listen to people talk about women being disadvantaged and not taken seriously and trolled on the internet, they're giving kind of a modern version of this old-fashioned explanation of women. They're sort of saying, even though we've had all this feminism and all this equality since the 60s and before, massively impacting society, the bottom line is, when women go on the internet, nobody takes them seriously, and they're just completely and totally abused by trolls every second. And the only thing that can stop this is for the good feminist men to come along and save the women on the internet and shame everybody else into taking them seriously and stop sending them horrible troll-like sexual harassment comments. That to me actually sounds like a modern version of this pre-feminist 1950s notion of what women are like that actually is condescending towards women and belittles their achievements. And that's something that I've been hearing a lot in people answering this first question about the internet. So let's go on that note to question 2. Is it helpful or harmful to accept that? Well, my answer was that on the whole, women have made the internet an unprecedented forum for gender equality that we've never had before. It's obviously helpful to accept that. And I think what it's harmful to accept is the idea that equality and feminism have had no impact whatsoever on women's experiences on the internet. It's harmful to think that the salient feature of women's experiences on the internet is being given sexually harassing comments by men. Because again, that belittles the achievements of women on the internet, and it completely reduces women to something like helpless victims, which is exactly what feminism has been so good at stopping women from being. And speaking of victimhood, let's go to question 3, which is, what's the best book, article, film, video you've seen this year about womanhood? Well, I think it's important to recognize that womanhood isn't really that important as a kind of experience to think about. Why? Because experiences of being a woman are incredibly, incredibly diverse. Why? Because women are 50% of humans. 50% of humanity, you're not going to find a lot of common ground that's more substantive than what you find with other groups. So for instance, if you think about a female INTP and a female ESFJ, I don't think they're going to have more in common than that INTP female and an INTP male would, on the whole. I mean, you might get some exceptional cases where you've got an ESFJ woman and an INTP woman having a lot in common with shared interests and so on, but I think in general, the commonalities that you find between people who have a similar type are going to be stronger than the commonalities that you find between people just because they're men or just because they're women. And because of that, I think it's important to de-emphasize the idea that being a woman somehow is its own kind of psychological experience with its own kind of psychological properties, which are unique to femaleness. One of the problems I have with that is that as soon as you assume that being a woman is a psychological category, rather than just a causal historical one about the shape of your body, you're back into gender roles again. And that's the very thing that feminism is supposed to be challenging, right? So the idea that being a woman gives you a significantly unique experience that only other women have, I think is actually undermining the extent to which women and men are equal because they share experiences that have more to do with who they are as individuals than what their gender would dictate about them. So that's my response to question number 3. What about question number 4? Is a focus on supportive networks of women beneficial or harmful to the cause? Well, if the cause is something like, rape awareness, protection, or feminism, or something like that, all women Facebook forum groups can be fine. But I think we need to give a qualified answer to that question too, which is more than just segregation is good for genders when it comes to promoting gender equality. Whenever you get a group of people together, be they all men or all women, or a mixture of men and women, you're going to get people behaving like people. When people come together on a Facebook forum, or any other kind of forum, there's normally tension. There's normally people saying things that hurt other people by accident. There's normally people being subtly bigoted in comments that they make. This isn't because women are particularly catty, it's because people are catty. And if you segregate men from women, a lot of the forms of oppression that women expect to go away don't actually go away. They just happen in a way where it's the women doing the oppression to each other, or rather the women doing the oppressing to each other. This is something that a lot of women have told me about. It's one of the reasons why I did my Maria Kang video. We live in a culture in which we're socialized to believe, as part of our gender norms, that men are the oppressors of women, that men are the ones that give women a hard time, the ones that are sexist and violent and abusive towards women. And we're expected to deal with that by encouraging the good men to save the women from the bad men. But we don't have much of a cultural touchstone or compass when it comes to dealing with the problem of women bullying other women, especially when it's over gender norms, which is something that you see happening in society all over the place. So while I think it may be positive for some groups of women to get together in women exclusive groups, I think it's important to acknowledge also that that's not going to eliminate forms of oppression. And I think in most cases, eliminating men from a group is not going to substantially alter the amount of discomfort that happens in the group, because people are people. One of the important aspects of recognizing the nature of gender equality is to recognize that men and women generally are difficult to get along with because people are difficult to get along with. And that's not going to change if you segregate men and women. Um, and speaking of segregating men and women, let's go to the next question, which is what have you done to support female creators over the past year? Well, I think the main thing I've done is I haven't treated them any differently to male creators. That is, I have a lot of women friends who work in philosophy and on the internet and in the sciences and in the arts who I think are doing things that are absolutely wonderful. I'm a fan of women who work in those areas who I don't know, who I think are doing things that are absolutely wonderful. But I'm not going to buy something because it was made by a woman. I'm not going to endorse a political position because a woman is endorsing it. I'm not going to buy an album because a woman made it. I'm not going to say that something was fantastic because women did it. Um, and the reason I'm not going to do that is because I think it's important to treat people as individuals, where what you admire and promote about them is the quality of what they do. Um, and I think if we want a society in which men and women are treated equally, we can't just promote women because they're women. Even if they're a minority in a given field, they have to be promoted on their merits if we really want gender equality. Now, I'm not inferring from that say we shouldn't have things like affirmative action or quotas where we redress imbalances in hiring practices, because I think you can provide a strong case that when it comes to wealth redistribution, it's important to redress gender inequality through redistribution. But I think socially, it's important not to redistribute the way we do economically. It's important to treat everyone equal socially. And that is, if a woman comes along and does a really bad internet blog or a bad novel or a bad record or is not good in the sciences or whatever, it's important not to refrain from admitting and acknowledging that because she's a woman. And when you, on the other hand, promote the work of a very talented woman in whatever field she's in, it's important to promote the work because she's good, not because she's a woman. And that leads to the next question, which is, are things better now than they were this time last year? I think in a trivial sense, the answer is yes. Things are always getting better than they were the previous year, except in unusual periods when you've got huge backslides, like, the period between 1933 and 1945. But on the whole, in human history, gender equality is something that is substantially getting better and better. And I think it's as important in the fight for equality to recognize the advancements as it is to recognize the extent to which we're not fully where we need to be yet. And that means it's important not to describe women just as victims, but also describe women as people who are becoming empowered, who are facing gender norms in a positive way, and who are creating a climate in which nobody wants to be sexist anymore. And that's really the huge message that I get from what's happened with the internet qua gender politics in the last 15 years, is women have made it an environment where for the most part people don't want to be trolls. You do get trolls, and it is a problem, but people react to trolls by calling them trolls because the majority of men and women don't want to be in that position. The majority of men and women don't want to be sexist. They might not understand enough about gender equality to understand what it means not to be sexist, but it's something that people really, really don't want to do. And I think that's because of feminism, and it's because of the work that women have done, and some men who call themselves feminists like me. But primarily it's women, and it's something that I think we need to acknowledge so as to not, again, belittle the achievements of women. And speaking of belittling the achievements of women, this leads to the next question, which is, what do you pledge to do in the next 12 months to support female creators? Well, I don't think you should support female creators because they're female. I think you should support them because they're good. If you phrase a question like this, it seems like you're trying to get an answer from the responder along the lines of, I'm going to do such and such to promote female creators. And I think that's the inappropriate response to give to the question that this question is raising, which is, what do we do about the fact that women are often not taken seriously in forums of the internet where they're doing things that are outside of the domestic sphere, which are creative or which involve the articulation of ideas and so on and so forth? I think that we need to do in the internet at this point in time is treat women like they're no different to men, in the sense that we need to treat women as praiseworthy when they do work which is fantastic, and I think we should be indifferent to the work that comes from women which isn't very good, and that's exactly what we do to men. And that goes some way towards introducing the next question, which is the question in this survey which makes me feel, I think, the most queasy. And it's, who are your 5 favorite internet females? Oh my God. That's a bit like, who are your five favorite blacks on the internet? Or who are your five favorite gay people on the internet? Or who are your five favorite people with crutches on the internet? I mean, it's ridiculous. Why is it ridiculous? Because femaleness doesn't tell you very much about who a person is. It's not a good indicator of the sum total of a person's individuality. And when you want a society in which men are treated equally to women and vice versa, that means you want a society in which when people appreciate and acknowledge women, it's because of their individuality. It's not because of the fact that they're women. To give an analogy, I'm a Mexican American, right, living in England. I would never ever want to be on a poll of somebody's top five favorite Mexican Americans. Why? Because being a Mexican American doesn't have anything to do with any substantive component of my individuality. It has to do with the color of my skin and the shape of my features. A little bit about my family history. But if I was not Mexican American, I'd still eat the same Mexican American food and I'd still watch the same Mexican films as I do now. The fact that I am Mexican American doesn't tell you very much about the sorts of things about me that are praiseworthy or the sorts of things about me which need to be criticized. And as such, I think it's really important to praise people for who they are and not simply praise or promote people because of the groups that they belong to. Now, again, when it comes to economic conditions in society disadvantaging groups, I think you can make a positive, substantive case for wealth redistribution in the service of tapering off some of those imbalances. But I think, again, socially, when you talk about people as individuals, the primary feature of the person that you should talk about when you take an interest in them and praise them is who they are. It shouldn't be what physical group they belong to, what their genitals are, what their skin color is, whether or not they're disabled, and so on. It should be what they have to say, what they do, what they think, who they are. And my worry about this lady's survey is that even though it's well intentioned, it doesn't place enough of an emphasis for me on the importance of treating women as individuals. Treating women as individuals is the goal of equality, right? The goal of equality is not to have a bunch of women that are all the same. The goal of equality is to have a situation in which no one has an unfair disadvantage, and in which no one is prejudged as being a certain way, and in which no one's individuality is ignored, right? The whole point of gender equality is to create a society in which women can be however they want to be, provided that however they are is something they have a fair chance at being. That's what the equality supplements. It supplements the individuality of women. And I don't see that aim very strikingly portrayed either in a lot of the answers to this survey or in the survey itself. But again, that's just how I see it. You might see it differently. I'd be interested to see what any of you have to say about the video or the survey itself. I'm interested in what Dr. Mike has to say. So, if you disagree with me, that's fine. I find your disagreements interesting. Hope you enjoyed the video. And I hope that if you love women in your life, it's because you love them as people and not because they're women. Peace out.